On. There we go. Now you guys can hear me, right? Sorry about that. Let me know in the comments if you can hear me now. I think you can hear me now. So anyway, I'll go over my little spiel again. So, the problem with the mic and everything else right now is that I have this new device. I've got the Yellow Box Ultra. So it's a 4K. It really is a neat thing. It's a switcher streamer, and it does cellular bonding and things like that. Yes, okay, good. Now you can hear me on my audio. So it does cellular bonding and things like that, which is cool because my up speed here, I pay for the fastest internet that I can get available to me where I live here. And they always market the download speed. So you got 10 gigs download. Well, that's great, but I've got like 40 megabits up because it's old school. It's over copper. It's still on a cable connection, right? So anyway, I digress. I'm still learning this unit, so this might be a little bit clunky of a live stream. And I was saying that one of the things was it didn't schedule eloquently in YouTube. I think because this is like Korean or Chinese or something, and it's still on Chinese time, and I'm in California and I'm not on Chinese time. I don't know what happened, right? So I'm still trying to figure out how to schedule on this device and then have it talk nicely to YouTube and such. But hey, it's great to see everybody. Let me pull up again Gurmeet, and it's good to see you, Gurmeet. Is the Q343 good? You know what's funny is I had notes here about things I wanted to talk about on this stream, and that wasn't in them. But yeah, so what Gurmeet is talking about, if nobody knows what the Q343 is, Leica has had for several years now, the Q3 series of cameras, and they've always had, I think it was a 28 millimeter, a very nice 28 millimeter lens on these things, but it was a 28 millimeter prime. It's not an interchangeable lens camera. It's, I think, 60 megapixels. I think it's 60 megapixel. I think it's the same sensor that they use in their M series cameras, but it was 28 millimeter. You know, and so it would limit you to things that are 28 millimeter are good for. And now they have come out with, that they just announced a few days ago, a Q343. So it's the same, as I understand it. Everything is the same about the Q3 28 millimeter camera, but they have a 43 millimeter fixed, I believe, manual focus lens on the front of it. And the answer, Gurmeet, is yeah, like it's going to be. Like I would love to get my hands on one of those, but I think in true Leica fashion, they are extraordinarily expensive. Okay, no audio. Yes. Good now. Okay, good. So, King Kruk, what up, brother? And so, how you doing? So, I wish I could see how many people are watching. I know it's, so I see you right there too, Joe. Joe Smithy Bike. Good to see you. Yeah, all right. Well, my audio's good now, and it was pretty easy to make it good. See, that's what's cool so far that I'm finding about this YOLO box thing is everything is really intuitive. Just got to figure out the scheduling thing. So, the title of the stream today was why Sony, Canon, and Nikon are not as competitive as you might think. And this is, hey, Carlos. Yes, it's not a new haircut. I'll get to your comments here. Let me say my piece first, okay? So I was thinking recently about, and this actually came up, I'm not going to take full credit for this as an original thought, but I was watching Brandon Washington's live stream recently, him and Jarrell, and they were discussing what it would take for all the different manufacturers to, quote unquote, win this year, okay? And the premise they're coming from is that Canon has clearly won this year, right? Because we had the R5 Mark II, we had the R1, we have the C80, and we have the C400. And so there aren't any other of these companies that are doing anything nearly, laying that much product on the market and that much good, exciting, new, powerful product on the market that goes all up and down the range of users and such as Canon has in 2024. And so what can the other manufacturers do? And we're going to talk specifically about Sony, and I still put Nikon in the big three, and I know that that is debatable for some people, but I still put them in the big three. What can they do to win the year, to win 2024? Now, yes, we're in Q4 of 2024, and so that might be a little bit too little too late for something like that to occur. But I got to thinking about it, and it's like, okay, what can Sony do? Well, Sony doesn't have, and I used Sony for many years before I switched over primarily to Canon, which is what I use now. The main thing that I did not like about Sony is I could never, it may be a cliche, but the Sony colors thing, that's a real thing. And especially if you're pointing the cameras at people, and it's not just a color thing, but it's kind of a texture thing too, where especially with the Sony video cameras, and especially the mirrorless hybrid Sony video cameras like the A7, S3 and such, they have a non-defeatable noise reduction that even at base ISO values, so 640, 800, whatever they are in the different cameras, when you're shooting log profiles, even at base ISO values, it is interjecting this noise reduction, which gives you just enough of a smear to the image to make skin look weird, to make it look kind of weird and plasticky. It's a texture thing. It's not just all a colors thing, but it's a texture thing. So that's one of the things was that Sony needs to really fix their colors. It would be nice for me to have somewhere for my pinky to grip, and I know that's a Sony design consideration is compactness of design. A couple things that Sony do right that Canon doesn't do is one thing that I've kind of harped on before, but I see very few people actually making a deal of it, is the use of zebras in stills mode. On Sony hybrid cameras, Sony mirrorless cameras, you can do zebras in stills mode. And so Carlos is in the chat here. Where were you, Carlos? Asked if I got a new haircut. No, it's not a new haircut. It's actually, I've actually been seeing a barber recently for the first time since like lockdown. And so I had been like just buzzing my head, since 2020. And then it grows out, and then I buzz it again. But I've been seeing a barber lately. And actually I was supposed to see her again yesterday, but she got sick. So this is like a 3 or 4 week old haircut. But yeah, thanks for noticing, I guess. I mean, if you like it. If you don't like it, well then, pounce in or whatever. But I think you like it. You're getting me off track. So Sony does right. These zebras in stills mode. And so that's really handy because a lot of these other systems you have to rely just on a histogram. And some of them you can break out an RGB histogram, right? So you can see the red, blue, and green channel and which one of them is close to clipping. And so that's useful if you're outside because you can see where the sky is by looking at the blue channel. But Sony goes a bit further, and they have zebras that you can define just like as if you're recording video, that you can then use that tool to also expose for stills. And so Carlos, this is where I was going with this. When I was first mentioning this to him a while back, he says, well, you mean like a video tool that you want? And what's funny about that is, Carlos has been using Canon cameras for, most of his life, I think. He has used Sony too, but he looks at it like kind of the way that the Canon looks at it, where to Canon, it's a video tool. And I think to most other systems, it's a video tool as well. But me, who kind of cut my teeth in the Sony system, I became professional and started, making money and using these things within the Sony system. I really just got used to using that and having it there. So unlike a histogram, I can see when I point it at a scene, not only that something's clipping, but I can see what is clipping. And so that's the way I would use zebras, and how I use it for video usually too, is I don't put them, I know some people like to put them around middle gray or skin tones or whatever, they want to expose for. I always like to just, where's my point of no return on the highlights, and that will kind of tell me if I've captured enough latitude to go from there. So that's, I think Sony does that right. Another thing I think Sony does right is they do dual symmetrical media with the CFX-A cards. And I know the counterpoint to that is they're not as fast as the CFX-B cards. So nowadays we have these cameras with enormous frame rates and data rates and such, and you can't record that to the CFX-A. But, in practice, these cards are really fast. Not only are they really fast, but just like all of this media, they are progressing generationally, right? So the next generation of CFX-A will record like twice as much data as, capacity throughput as the last ones will. And I think Sony's really well positioned to be able to leverage that because their bodies are such that they can get dual redundant media, because these things are only, they're smaller than an SD card slightly. These things are only about the size of an SD card, and so they can get dual redundant CF Express A cards in their bodies, and that's something that Canon or anybody else doesn't do. So I really think they're positioned well for that. So let me get to some of the comments here, and then I will continue. Ayan, good to see you. How about LiDAR Focus Pro at Blackmagic Productions 4K. I haven't played with that. I think you're talking about the DJI LiDAR Focus thing. I haven't played with the individual unit. I did play with a Ronin 4D at NAB this year, which has a pretty much that on board. I don't know what the differences are between the one that comes on the 4D and the one that you can buy as a standalone unit. But one thing that I really liked with the 4D is it was really neat. So it uses the LiDAR, and let's say your subject is 6 feet in front of you. It will depict that as a depth map from like an overhead perspective. So you can see, based on the return of the LiDAR, right, you can see like kind of where your subject is. It's just a different way of doing it. And it was a really clever and well thought out way of doing it, because the other thing that it would do was the actual focus wheel that you were turning. It would have active resistance, and it would go back to wherever the subject is. And so you could manually pull it away from the subject, but it will actually haptically go back to the subject. So, and all of that, I'm assuming, is tunable also within these systems, right? So how that behaves, and if it has any resistance, and if it goes back to center or whatever, right? But LiDAR Focus Pro with the Blackmagic Productions 4K, I think it's great. For never having used it, I don't have any use of it, but from what I've seen, it's not totally like a sensor-based AF system with a lot of the mirrorless cameras, in that you have to define what lens you have on it, and you have to show it the hard stops. This is infinity and this is close focus, and then there's some how you mount the eye part of it, the sensor part of it that's shooting the LiDAR out, in relation to the sensor plane or like whatever. Like, it takes some setting up. But it seems like it's pretty reliable, especially for, like you'd said, the Blackmagic Productions 4K. Are you talking about the Studio 4K? So especially if you have a camera like that that's just mounted, and let's say you're doing talking head stuff, or you're doing event coverage, where you've got somebody at a podium or something like that, I think it's pretty good for stuff like that. So, it's definitely worth checking out. I don't have one just because I don't have one. Not that I wouldn't check one out. Scotty, got your C400 yesterday. Smoking. So have you used it? I know. It's funny. I've been seeing like all the content on all the unboxing content drop on YouTube. All right. I got my C400. Yeah. So you're gonna have to let me know. Let me know what you like and what you don't. I think. With the C400 and the C80, I really want to know, and I'm sure there will be plenty of comparisons online coming up, because it looks like they're kind of, they're blitzing them out now. I want to know where the image of it compares to the C70, which I'm familiar with, the R5C, which I'm familiar with. Really, those two cameras, the C70 and the R5C. I want to know what the C80 image looks like compared to the C70, the R5C. I want to know how robust it is in the grade. I want to know what the highlight behavior is. Now, the C70 does C-Log2 native, and allegedly it has more stops of dynamic range than the C400, or a more stop of dynamic range than the C400, but the C400 and the C80 have that triple base ISO thing, which the C70 does not. C70 is not really great at high ISO, whereas the C80 and C400 look like they are. So I don't know, can you get a better image out of a C70 if you are giving the sensor enough light? Maybe. But it's going to certainly be less malleable and usable at different ISOs than C400. So before I jump in and get either one of those, C400 or C80, I actually really liked, I've really been liking using the R5C for real estate lately, shooting it 8K 60 RAW, just because I can then take that into post and interpret it as C-Log2 and get that nice C-Log2 highlight roll off, because whether the sensor can cover the C-Log2 gamma or not, C-Log2, the highlight roll-off as it approaches that white point is much more gentle and much better than C-Log3. So I like using it for that. Canon stands for the past. Nikon stands for the present. Sony stands for the future. Okay, Leo. Boy, Scotty's not going to like that comment, brother. Okay. So thank you, though, Leo, for getting me back on track, okay? So I talked about what Sony, I think, could do, to still pull out a good 2024. Those are the things look, the reason I say it like that, okay, with the Zebras thing and with the CFX, a redundant media thing and the grip thing, the reason I say it like that is because And this is something that I really realized the more that I digested things like the C80 and the C400 and the R5 II and the R1. Okay, so I have an R3, that's my daily driver, and the R1 came out, and it looks like an R3. It looks like an R3 mostly. You know, it looks so much like an R3 that it kind of gives a bit more credit to the theory that the R3 was actually going to be the R1. You know, when it came out, right on the heels of the Sony A1, which throttled it in a lot of ways, right? So I don't need that. I don't need the R1 because I already have an R3, and it's pretty much like an R3 Mark II, you know, more than it's an R1. I don't think they went far enough with that design to make it the heavens have opened up and everything bows down to it, right? And then the R5 Mark II. Well, I use, the R5 Mark II. Well, I use the R5C. I've got a pair of them. I use them mostly as video cameras. I do use them as stills cameras as well from time to time, but I use them mostly as video cameras, the R5Cs. So for what I do, I live in 60 frames because I'm shooting real estate for sale, right? And so I'm living in 60 frames so I can slow everything down, get that nice smooth motion. I'm on a gimbal. I mean, it's very formulaic, right? And that's just how you shoot real estate, is you shoot it at you know, the high frame rate so then you can slow it in post. And the R5 Mark II came out, and it's not a video camera, and that's fine. You know, it's a great stills camera. It's above the R5 OG in every single way, but when you start talking about video and you're looking at video, it is not the R5C's equal in some pretty key areas. The R5C will never overheat. The R5C oversamples 4K 60 and XFAVC, even though it cannot interpret that as C-Log2, but it does do 8K 60, right, in C-Log2, which I think the R5 II does as well. But my point is, you know, and the sensors have been tested. Josh Staten did a pretty good video about, you know, the sensors have been tested between the R5 II and the R5C. They're not much different. You know, so that's another reason that I was saying, like, kind of I was curious about the C80 and the C400, because that sure looks like an R3 sensor. And every time Canon gets asked if it is an R3 sensor, because it's a 3x2 sensor, whereas video cameras are typically 17x9 sensors, so it's taller, they kind of get spooky about it, you know, like, oh, it's a brand new device. I think it's an R3 sensor, and so does everybody else. So I have an R3. Right, and I have a pair of R5Cs, and so does the latest crop of Canon cameras. Are they attractive to me? So that's why I'm talking about these types of things, right? Like the colors and like the zebras and the media and stuff. Like that's where these camera companies are going to win these days, because the imaging on it has, I don't want to say plateaued, but it has certainly slowed a lot down in the past couple of years as far as just, you know, what the cycle used to be. So Nikon, what you need to do for 2024, build a better flagship. That's really the thing. So now that's not me throwing shade at the Z8 and Z9, because the Z8 and the Z9 are amazing cameras, but it is concerning when there are two things that are concerning about Nikon's trajectory here. Okay, and this is maybe a different opinion than a lot of people have about this. The first thing is they built the Z9. And the Z9 is baller in all kinds of ways, right? Nobody's taken anything from the Z9. I mean, it's an amazing camera. And then, in the interim, you had Canon releasing cameras, like I think the R5C was released since the Z9. You had Sony going global shutter, like with the A9 Mark III, you know, and you had these cameras that are making big leaps. I mean, the R5C is still, I think, probably the most powerful true hybrid that exists still, even with this new crop of cameras out, right? And global shutter, you know, I mean, Sony going global shutter, right? So Nikon takes 2 years after the Z9 to not develop anything new, but instead they stripped it down to a lower price point and then released the Z8. And everybody, you know, cheered, yay. because now I can afford a Z9. You know, they call it Z8, and it doesn't do all these cool things. But they didn't really develop anything, did they? You know, even the new Z6 III with their half-stacked whatever, it's like, okay. It seems to have some trouble with dynamic range. So Nikon really, you know, that's concerning to me. And the other thing that's concerning to me and exciting at the same time is them buying red, because that means that Nikon's both things collectively, okay? Nikon taking 2 years just to strip down the Z9 to a cheaper price point, and then them buying red instead of really robustly developing video type of capabilities themselves. Both of those things show me that the Nikon's R&D isn't that great. You know, when they're not developing anything new themselves, and then they're instead buying other firms to, I mean, hey, great, now they're showing that part of it up, right? Because red's got street cred and it's legit. But Nikon needs to build a better flagship. And I'm going to get into why that is, too, when I get into why these companies don't really compete with each other. Let me take a look at the comments here. Ooh, here's some interesting comments. Okay. Gurmeet, my first camera was Nikon D70, then moved to D300, Canon 5D Mark II. Trying to see if you guys, do you have these big comments over the feed? I don't think you do. I'm going to go like that instead, because I'm not sure how that's, again, a new piece of gear. Okay, my first camera was Nikon D70, then moved to D300, Canon 5D Mark II, moved to Sony A7R5. You know, I had a similar trajectory, Gurmeet. My first real camera that I bought was a crop sensor, the Nikon D70-200. Loved that camera. I still think it's a fantastic camera. So D70-200, and I had that for a couple of years, and then at that time the Sony A7 III was newly out. They were unobtainium for a while. Everybody wanted an A7 III because it was $2,000 in full frame and 24 megapixel. And you know that really, the A7 III I think is the most important camera of the past decade. You know, a lot of people would say that the Canon 5D Mark II because of the video thing on board. I think it's the A7 III because it not only put Sony on the map, but it's the first time that a mirrorless camera was accepted as a professional tool, right? And so you had a lot of photographers going to a full-frame mirrorless camera from whatever other system, and it happened to be a Sony. But that was a real turning point in the whole industry, I think. So yeah, my trajectory was a lot the same, Gurmeet, and I ended up going through the gamut of Sonys. You know, the A1, I had the A7R5 briefly, I ended up returning it because it's the same sensor as the A7R4. And A7R5 is great. It's an older sensor in that camera, though, and at that time I had been using the A1 for a while, and the A1's sensor is just more robust in post than the A7R5. But if I could take anything from that A7R5, it'd be the screen is brilliant, you know, because it feels good, too. That's what you don't realize about that screen until you get that camera, is it's a wonderful design. Sony will launch the new FX3 and FX6. I hope so. I hope so, and I hope that they are 6K. Panasonic is best for skin. I've never seriously used a Panasonic camera. That's kind of the one brand that you know, I haven't really enjoyed a lot of the footage that I've seen from Panasonic cameras. And it's funny you say that it's best for skin because, like, when I look at Panasonic footage, it looks polarized, like in a technical sense, right? It looks like what you do when you stick a polarizer on something where, you know, the colors kind of become like a little bit warmer and more vibrant. I don't know. That's just me. That's just my eyeballs, you know, seeing it like that. Joe Smithy Bike, I returned R5 II and switched back to Sony because missing the bracketing shooting mode. Oh, that's interesting. It's easier to switch between self-timer and continuous bracketing while maintaining the same exposure settings. So Joe, what kind of stuff are you shooting that that you're using brackets for? Because I'm shooting real estate primarily, and that's something that a lot of folks use brackets for. And let me see, Josh tells me this is what the comments look like. Okay, cool. So then I am gonna put it back like this. Thanks, Josh. And then bring up the comments like that. Self-timer continuous bracketing while maintaining the same exposure settings. So I shoot brackets, so I have a flambient type of workflow with real estate, right? So I will shoot what is considered a bracket that goes, I'll do like one stop down. I'll start bright and I'll go one stop down for like 3 or 4 stops each shot. And then I'll turn on the strobe and pull my windows, right? And do a strobe shot to pull windows. And really on that, I'm looking to true up colors because the strobe is a known temperature, right? And I'm looking to control window bloom around the windows. But I have not used auto bracketing. And the reason for that is because it's easier for me to adjust everything just manually doing it on the fly, because every shot is a little bit different than if I were to set up bracketing for my ambient brackets. And with the Canon app, with the Camera Connect app, it's really easy as well, because it has like this little ruler that you slide, right? And that's what I'm doing, is I'm wirelessly tethering to an iPad. It's really easy to do that quickly, to do manual brackets like that. So I'd be interested to hear what you're shooting that you're using brackets on. Yo, Brian. Yo, Josh. Thanks for the shout out for the comments there. Have you tried the Viltrox AF 16mm 1.8 full frame lens for E-mount for video? No. I didn't know there was such thing. But I will say my E-mount video setup for real estate ended up being the A7S III, and my main lens for shooting interiors was the Zeiss Batis 18. And then I also would use the Sony 35mm 1.8, the little one, which is a fantastic lens. I love that one. And also the older Sony 55 1.8, the Zeiss Sony one. And the reason that I landed on those 3 lenses is because they're all really well corrected, but not only that, they are about the same weight as each other. So the Zeiss Batis, for the size of lens it is really light. You know, so the 18 Batis, and then the 35 1.8, which is a small lens, and the 55 1.8, which is a small lens. And so when I'm shooting real estate and I'm using a gimbal, I don't have to rebalance my gimbal between them, right? I balance it once for the 18, which is going to be the majority of my shots. It's the wide shots. So it's the most critical to have the best balance on the gimbal for that lens. But then when I'm shooting 35s and I'm shooting 55s, it's going to be more for like a detail kind of oriented type of shooting, right? And so the gimbal isn't as critical that it's like right in balance, but those 3 lenses are, I mean, they balance really, really closely anyway. So that's the reason I had those 3 ones in particular. Okay. Oh, same comment. Yeah, 16mm for 5. All right, so let me get on to why I think these companies aren't that competitive, right? I got to thinking, okay, what is the most important camera for all of these systems? And what I found is there are 3 different levels, okay? So for Nikon, the most important camera is at the top. It's the Z8, Z9. And the reason the most important camera is at the top for Nikon is because they're playing catch-up, right? They're playing catch-up with Sony and with Canon as far as what their cameras can do, as far as market shares, as far as all this stuff. And so they have to bring it. You know, their most important camera is, this is what we can do, right? It's the Z9 and Z8. Now, for Canon, it's a little bit different, right? Because for Canon, their most important camera is the R5. And it has kind of always been that. You know, you get the sports cameras, the R1 used to be the 1D, 1DX, you know, and all those ones. And those are in the hands of pro action shooters everywhere. But it's not their most important camera. I would say Canon's most important camera always has been the 5 series cameras, right? So the 5D, the R5, the R5 II now, the R5C. I mean, these are the ones that are in the hands of commercial photographers out there. They're in the hands of wedding photographers out there. You know what I mean? Like, these are the ones. This is the most important camera for Canon to get right. And it doesn't sit at the top of the heap, right? The R1 and the 1 series cameras sit at the top of the heap. And so Canon and Nikon don't really compete because they're most important cameras, even though they both have cameras that cover, you know, both of those type of scenarios. The important cameras for each company to get right are at 2 different tiers. Sony, okay, we're going to go down market even a little bit more with Sony. Their most important camera is the A7 series of cameras, right? The A7 II, A7 III, A7 IV, you know, the A7 V is probably coming pretty soon. That is clearly Sony's most important camera. But it's also the most affordable full-frame camera from Sony, right? It'd be the same as like a Nikon Z6, or it'd be the same as the Canon R8. Well, maybe R8. R8's kind of a weird example. The R6, we'll say, right? R6 isn't as important of a camera for Canon as the R5 is, but for Sony, the A7 series camera is the most important camera. And that's 2 tiers down, right? You've got the A1, A9 III, which are kind of co-flagships. Then you've got the R body, right? The A7, R5, you know. And then you get down to like the A7 IV, and that's their cheapest full-frame camera. So that doesn't compete with the other 2 because Canon's competing on the middle tier and Nikon's competing on the high tier, right? And again, all 3 of these companies have cameras that cover all of this. But what is the most important cameras for these companies to get right? And it's at 3 different tiers. And I never thought about it like that. But when I do think about it like that, it seems like maybe they're not as competitive as we might think. All of these, you know? Viltrox, Joe, AF 16 1.8, brand new 550. I'm always so scared about things like that, man. You know, and I know that this is the day and age of inexpensive yet still pretty good lenses, right? Most of them coming from China. And I am a huge advocate of the Venus Optics Laowa lenses. I think those are, you know, the 12 millimeter Laowa. I've made a lot of money, right, with a 12 millimeter Laowa on crop bodies. So on like the Canon C70, on the Red Komodo and the Red Komodo X. When I'm shooting interiors, I would use a 12 millimeter Laowa, and I've got like a couple different copies of it. And I used to have even more, you know, for like I had an E mount, an EF mount, and I've got an RF mount, Cine version of it. I've made a lot of money with that lens. I don't know if Viltrox is. See, and that's the thing with these kind of, you know, with these more inexpensive Chinese lenses is there's such a variance in quality between companies and sometimes even between the lenses within those companies. Whereas, like, if you get a first-party lens, like if you get a Canon lens, you kind of know what you're getting. You know, it's a standard that they take very seriously. And, you know, is it the best? No. Is it the worst? No. But it is what it is, you know, and they've spent a lot of time and money developing what that standard is. I just don't know if a lot of these companies like Viltrox have that standard really ironed out. Right, like the first-party manufacturers will. Sigma is like I consider Sigma a first-party manufacturer nowadays. You know, they're making as good a lenses as anybody, and they have been for a while. But no, I have not seen that. Let me see if I missed any comments here. And yeah, so if you guys have nothing more to comment than I've been going 40 minutes. I will probably call it a good live stream. I'm not like crazy people like Josh Satin. I don't know if you're still here, Josh, but he goes like 2 hours nowadays. I've got stuff to do, man. I can't go 2 hours. So yeah, sorry about the microphone snafu. I hope this looks okay and sounds okay and everything. I really like this yellow box, whatever it is, Ultra, that I'm using right now. I think the image is good. I think the stream is stable, and I think the audio is good, and it's really easy to do everything, like the countdown timer and stuff I had. So I'm going to be doing these streams more regularly, and I haven't quite figured out, I wanted to record this also in 4K. King Krug, Josh has built his live stamina. No, he hasn't, man. Like, he gripes about it afterwards. Need to build yours up as well. I'd be happy to. I know that I've been absolutely. It's just because it's, this real estate market is just trucking right along. And usually we slow way down this time of year, and finally it seems like that is trying to happen. But I've been busy. I've been as busy over this past month as I was in spring, and that's great. Because I'm out there making that paper. But at some point I get tired, and I want to do more stuff like this. You guys have to beat Scott's 8-hour live. I didn't know he did an 8-hour. You know what though? It was funny. There are some Nikon guys, like. Exactly what you would think Nikon guys are, right? Like these 4 old guys, and they sit around and they have other old guys like show up. Hey, let's invite him in, and they sit around eating M&M peanuts and streaming for like hours, just rapping about cameras and stuff. So I wish I knew the guy's name, but you could probably find him because he's one of the only people streaming about Nikon. Anyway, I'm going to get on out of here. Thanks all for coming by. I'm going to try to figure out the scheduling thing on this too. And